Hi, everybody. This is Christopher J. Finn, Boogie Rags by Night, and this is Chapter 5, reading of The Stitches on the Stone, a novel exclusively available on Amazon in both Kindle and paperback formats. Now, last week we left off with Janis and Madelyn searching frantically for the stone. Benji and Mary looking to do a little recon in Tweed's restaurant, which is Larry Tweedle's restaurant, and uh, and Edward building some strange structure in his basement. Now, Benji and Janice soon clash in the restaurant. Some strange force throws them apart, and the result is probably a large mess in what is left of the Tweeds restaurant. We are going to pick up with Edward, who is currently back in his basement. And this is November 5th, starting with Edward. Edward unleashed a cloud of sawdust in an already hazy basement with a clap of his hands. A single light bulb hung loosely at the center of his newly created hallway, where it, once upon a time, supplied enough light to fill this single-room basement. Long arcing shadows danced between the mix of wood and metal, making up the entirety of the pens lining the basement walls. Thick lengths of rebar stretched from the ceiling to the floor, spaced and secured through holes drilled in 2x4s. 20 of these bad boys filled the basement, 10 per side, each separated by rebar and wood, with a sliding door locked between two columns built of the same material as the walls. He created a small section at the front nearest the stairs to allow for a single horizontal sliding door, which in turn allowed for the second cell door to be opened, which allowed the next, and so on. His goal, once these spaces were occupied, he hadn't figured out by what exactly, was the entire column of pens would remain locked once he secured the first. All 4 pens needed to be opened to allow access to the 5th. Its purpose? Well, he was working on the particulars, but like everything happening in his life as of late, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Whatever the reasoning, whatever this odd desire to build wall-to-wall kennels in his basement, he knew it sated an ever-building burn at the center of his chest. If he let it go unchecked, he could scarcely breathe. At first, Edward thought this project to be nothing more than busy work, distracting him from the unexplained hole in his memory. Who was he? Who was he really? Edward didn't buy into the notion that he was a simple, rich slob with nothing to do as his bank account and lack of employment would imply. Edward searched his home and found the place lacking. There were pictures of Edward, but only of Edward. No books described any of his expenditures. The only receipts he possessed were the few collected from McRory's. He owned a digital phone without any contacts saved. He found a beeper and a tremendous, cordless box cellular phone, but neither had a call history nor a single phone number stored. The more Edward looked, the more of a mystery he became. As he searched, Edward became entrenched in this void, and his desire to move beyond the safety of his home and basement and explore the world around him. What better way to discover who he is? He couldn't, and he didn't know why. Ed pulled in a deep, unsatisfying breath and held it. He bunched the cloth around his chest into his fist, shifting uncomfortably beneath an aching fire in his lungs. The fucking burn wanted more from him. He wished he could talk to it and tell it, "Hey, I get it. No need for the drama, mama. Just tell me what you want done, and baby, I'll do it." A reply came in the form of unexpected pain with no way to counteract it. To Ed, it was like a classroom game where some snotty-nosed brat would wander around the room searching for a hidden object. His giddy classmates would tell him if he was getting warmer, colder, hot, or on fire. Except his fire was volcanic, and getting cold meant falling to his knees screaming. He turned and faced the top of the stairs. Sure enough, the pain somewhat subsided. Whatever it needed was up there. He whispered a plea for the fire to cool. He felt no apparent response, good or bad, and decided it must be time to go to work. Edward pulled open the garage door to a pleasant, if not chilly, November afternoon. Now nearing its zenith, the sun offered a hint of warmth, pleasing Edward to no end. He wore a simple, heavy white cotton long-sleeve shirt, and didn't think he'd be able to walk into the house to grab a jacket, not without passing out after his internal furnace flared its frustration at Edward's poor choices. Simply turning slightly to the left caused a sharp jolt in the pit of his gut. Edward rubbed out a knotted muscle near his abdomen, then walked to the edge of his driveway. Movement on his right captured his attention. A woman stood on a porch 2 houses to his left. The circumference of the cul-de-sac forced her porch to face Edward's. She leaned against a white column at the edge of her porch, her purple overcoat contrasting against the whites and yellows coloring much of her 2-story home. Edward dropped both hands to his sides and gawked dumbly at her. He wanted to know her name. He wanted to know what brand of cigarette she pressed between her full, flaming red lips. It was like seeing the dame from an old whodunit story. Real life, real time, and super sexy. She batted her dreamy dark eyes, which served as a spotlight on the woman's high cheekbones, dabbed with just the right amount of blush to accent her bright auburn hair. Oh, she was gorgeous, dangerous, and sexy enough to steal the breath from an elephant. Shouldn't he know her name, though? He felt he did, but nothing immediately came to mind. He oogled her as she lifted the cigarette to her lips, pulled, and released a cloud of smoke with a slight tilt of her head. Watching the muscles tense around her delicate jawline sent a shiver through the entire length of his body. He found himself adjusting a hardening rod pressed against the lining of his jeans, which Edward shifted by punching the inside of his left thigh. During a moment when Edward found himself lost between fascination and ecstasy, he separated into 2 minds. The first, a building torrent of lust, wanted nothing more than to charge at this woman, free her of her clothing, and take her where she stood. He'd ravage her until she screamed his name so loud and so true the heavens above would take notice. The second, a more congenial, refined sense of self, accessed portions of Edward's mind he seldom used. This internal Rolodex returned a name. Cheryl Helfrich, wife of Dr. Austin Helfrich, who, according to this new docket of information, worked at the Lauredale General Hospital. Day shift, it seemed. He licked his lips and let his eyes drift to Cheryl's bosom hidden beneath her shiny purple overcoat. His mouth fell open as she tossed the cigarette to the porch, stepped, and twirled on the butt before stepping onto the sidewalk. Cheryl approached Edward, crossing one foot around the other, giving her a pleasant hip shimmy visible beneath her long coat. Edward met her gaze. His lips pursed into a goofy, comical grin. He grunted, and she returned a sweet, passionate smile. "Edward," she purred, "you seem preoccupied. Everything okay with you?" Her voice tittered and danced across Edward's steadily heating flesh, leaving him flushed and chilled to the bone. The sensation occupied and spilled into the vacant rooms of his mind, then drained to his feet. Edward's mouth drooped into a dumb smirk, and he quickly shook his head no. Or was it yes? He couldn't be sure and wasn't satisfied. Either answer offered ample explanation of his ailments. Cheryl slowly circled him, kicking her bare legs in an ostentatious goose step while tapping a finger to her lower lip. "You've got a fire about you, don't you, friend Edward?" She paused at his back, then traced a finger along his shoulder line, whispering, "I'd like to tame that blaze." Edward turned. He took her in her arms in one sweeping move. She chirped with excitement, swiveled, and lifted her head, exposing her neck. She dropped both arms to her sides, and Edward pulled in a deep, thrilling breath before pressing his lips against her soft, inviting skin. The taste was bitter, tightening his stomach muscles into a tight knot. Edward's appetite wavered, and he pushed a nauseating burn down into his stomach, then let Cheryl fall to the ground with a snarl. He met her eyes briefly, then tracked along her neck, shoulder, and legs, taking in the entire picture. The sight sickened him, and he wanted nothing more than to press his boot into her repulsive face and grind it into the dirt. Somewhere deep within the recesses of his addled mind, he could hear his own voice shouting, "Where the hell is this coming from? What are you doing?" Yet Cheryl, with the blazing red lipstick, the web-like laugh lines around her doe-like eyes, all of it insulted his internal sensibility. The thought of touching her seemed revolting and blasphemous. "Edward, why?" she demanded. Cheryl scuffled to her feet, only to be pushed down by a heel to her stomach. She looked at him in confusion. "Don't," Edward warned. "Not one more fucking move. I mean it, Cheryl. If you get back up, I'll knock you down." He displayed his fists. "I'll do it, and I won't feel a fucking thing. I won't be sorry." Cheryl lifted herself to her knees, then spread her arms wide. She shuffled close to Ed. "Come now, Eddie. What is it you think you're going to do?" she teased. "You can't hurt me. You never could." Edward stalked her until he stood over Cheryl, then wrapped her hair around his left hand, forcing her to peer into his eyes. She nodded sadistically, and though she invited him, he could sense she hated him for what he was about to do. Edward pulled his closed fist to the base of her throat, shaking his arm until he opened his palm and wrapped his hand around her neck. "Do it," she soothed. "Whatever it is, Eddie, just do it, you fucking pussy." Edward pulled her to her feet. The fire within his guts simmered, then spread throughout his body in a wave. He shook, then glared into Cheryl's whorish eyes. Cheryl's beauty was averse and insulting. Everything about this woman, from her comical, porn-laced attempts at seduction to her sadomasochistic submission, seemed so very wrong and yet, in so many ways, right. His mind screamed, and he tried to step away, saying, "Run away from me, you crazy woman! Now! I know what I'm about to do to you, don't you? Can't you?" Cheryl smiled sympathetically. She swallowed and asked, "That it?" Edward blinked. In one hopeful moment of sanity, Edward saw himself backing away from Cheryl, lifting his arms high and returning to his garage. In the next moment, Edward viciously tightened the grip around her throat. He squeezed until her eyes widened and bulged. He waited until Cheryl turned pink, and then Edward, now beyond thought, beyond control, coiled and unleashed a blow to Cheryl's left temple. He struck again, this time hitting her nose, and when he didn't see blood, he pulled her face into his knee. Hot liquid erupted from her nostrils in a gagging huff, and still he continued his barrage of punches. There was no direction, no aim, just blow after severe blow, first attacking the back of her head, then her eye. "Yes. Close the eye, Edward. Then wrap your hands around her throat and end her before she can end you." He released her when his left hand grew numb. Cheryl rolled to the concrete in a thick pool of her own blood. She coughed, sending colored phlegm into the air, spraying Edward's pants leg. Edward dropped to his knees, exhausted. He crawled to her side and rolled Cheryl to him. She laughed and slapped both hands to the concrete. "You," she said, and added, after spitting out a glob of blood, "can do better than that, you shit stain of a man." Edward nodded. He gripped his left hand with his right and rose to his knees. He raised his hammered fist to the sky and struck one final fantastic blow against Cheryl's abdomen. She gasped and her eyes rolled back into her head. Edward inspected his work. He rubbed his belly, satisfied he had sated whatever urge had pushed him to this brink of madness. Edward looked at Cheryl, then to the house. He forced himself to stand, hoping he had the strength to move, hell, even to breathe. Edward's eyelids fluttered, and he painstakingly bent, grabbed a handful of Cheryl's hair, and slowly began dragging her to his garage. Ooh, Janice. Janice opened her eyes to a clear blue sky. She blinked out a few tears and gave herself a cool minute to adjust to the morning sun. She swallowed, pulled in a breath, then coughed. Her throat was on fire, and she could taste burnt rubber mixed with wood and phlegm. Janice sat up, eyes wide. What on earth? Janice couldn't complete the sentence. She wanted to ask, why the hell am I sleeping in a metered parking space, but the words wouldn't reach her lips. She glanced behind her, and sure enough, someone had dropped coins into the meter box. Unbelievable. Tweeds, or what was left of the restaurant, sat off to her right, meaning she lay where she had landed the night before. The storefront was a shambled mess of concrete and glass. The overhang was nothing more than a wire-frame skeleton sitting on a charred black wall. She could see no furniture, save for the few bits embedded into the interior wall. Cones wrapped in caution tape cordoned off the entrance, sidewalk, and parking areas at the front of the building to Janice's right. Janice gawked dumbly at the scene and shook her head. She had been laying there the entire time, and the police, firefighters, and paramedics would have combed this area all night long. And yet... Hey! Madelyn chirped. Janice turned to see her friend filing her nails. About time you opened your eyes. She inspected her right hand and then began working on the left. Parking spaces are filling up fast. I was worried you were going to get run over. So I dropped a few quarters in the slot, just in case. She tossed the nail file over her shoulder. Did you know the first people on the street were the garbage guys? A whole slew of them just drove right on by about 4 this morning. Just in case of what? Janice asked. Madelyn motioned to the open parking space and pursed her lips. Janice sighed and pressed no further. Instead, she asked, what the hell happened? She had a great many questions, each spinning around like a prize wheel in her mind. One summary question to start the conversation, as anything else, just added to the building headache. Restaurant blew up. I thought you knew that, Madelyn snorted, adding, you pretty much caused it. Damnedest thing I ever did see. No, I know that. Wait, what? I caused it? You and that goofy boy you reached for, she giggled, before she continued. Launched his ass clear into the street. She lowered her head momentarily, stretched out both arms, sighed, and settled. Later. Just, no, she couldn't go that deep into the Madelynscape so early in the morning. No, why am I here? Janice patted the concrete. Like right here. Madelyn shrugged. I don't know. I tried to get the EMS guys to come look at you. She thought for a moment, then raised a finger for each person on her list. Then the fire department guys, the fire chief, inspector, tow truck driver, even Cindy from the block. Every time I mentioned your name or pointed at you, they'd either nod and walk away or push me aside and walk away. Fucking rude if you ask me. Madelyn brushed her hands clean and continued. Hell, I stood right here, she pointed to the floor, and screamed my bloody head off. Have a look-see. Madelyn stood and walked to the edge of the travel lane. She raised both hands and jumped, screamed, Hey! Over here! Help her, you assholes! She pointed to the man dressed in a suit overcoat, circumventing tweeds. You! He lowered his head. Hey, dickhead! You see her? Just sitting there, all dried and bloody? The man nodded, waved, and continued down the sidewalk before Madelyn could finish her sentence. Madelyn proudly took a seat next to Janice and giggled. See? Ain't that some shit? Well, why the hell didn't you just take me home? No way, sister. I figured we're in some Twilight Zone shit or something. I move you, we fall into some fiery void, and both our tits fall off. No, ma'am. I'm good right here staring at what's left of Tweeds. She slumped her shoulders and frowned. We didn't even get to eat. You could have at least pulled me to the grass. Christ, I feel like I slept on a rock. I can't feel my eyes. Concrete, Madelyn corrected. Janice turned. You slept on the concrete, not a rock. Though the headache you're complaining about has more to do with the boy than your bed. Right, Janice placated, then motioned for Madelyn. Help me up. Madelyn pulled Janice to her feet, dusted off her pant legs, and stretched. A woman the name didn't immediately come to mind, though she was undoubtedly someone Janice had dealt with previously, walked up the sidewalk nearest the two women. She perked once Madelyn released Janice's hand, and she stood of her own volition. Janice, Madelyn, I didn't see you two there. She stepped off the curb and joined the two on the concrete, then motioned to Tweeds with a nod of her chin. Horrible thing what happened there. I saw the whole event, start to finish. You were here last night? Janice asked, leaning away from the woman so she could meet Madelyn's eyes. She pointed to her. Madelyn shrugged, and then both stood straight. Start to finish. The woman brushed her blonde hair off her shoulders. Janice took a moment to examine her facial features, hoping a name might pop into her mind. She stood taller than both Janice and Madelyn, slim-build, and wore a plaid petticoat with a brilliant pink cloche on her head. She spoke with an air of refinement, so someone of her circle, but by God, she couldn't place the name. And you didn't see me lying here, Janice pointed to the ground. Here? Janice pointed to the parking space. Right here. She stomped her feet 3 times, then crossed her arms. Madelyn quickly nodded. Oh, come now. I think I'd notice if someone were lying on the ground, don't you? Especially after that fire, she fanned herself. It was the talk of the town, believe me. What do you remember? Madelyn asked. Well, the woman began thoughtfully, then pointed. You see where the window is on the left? Janice acknowledged the window, one of 3 on the left side of the charred building, with 2 additional windows on the right. At around, 5? Maybe 6 p.m. Honestly, I wasn't paying attention to the time. Well, I was standing over there. She turned their attention to a small convenience store on the left, a few doors down from the package store. I was talking to Junie. She turned to Janice. You know Junie, don't you? She's one of your Dilthy dolls. Lives a few houses down from yours. Anyway, Junie and I were talking when the window erupted, and I mean exploded outward. It was so loud. I must have jumped a mile. A second after the window shattered, the body of a boy followed. Then a fireball the likes I've never seen. Janice, I do not lie when I tell you, it screamed some horrid, high-pitched wail. It was a wonder no one was killed. So the little boy lived? Madelyn asked. The woman nodded. I suppose that's good news. Indeed, the woman continued. Afterward, Tweedle and all the customers and cooks wandered out. Some were smoking. Not the cigarette kind, dearie. Bodies steaming. You understand? Of course you do. Well, most others seemed right as rain. The fire department called it a freak gas leak, but I never heard of a gas leak doing what I saw last night. What'd the police say? Police? She thought for a moment. Can't say I recall any police. Just the fire department, ambulances, and a few of the townsfolk, maybe. But no police. Janice furrowed her brow. Are you sure? A big explosion like that? I'd think every cop in Lauredale would have come running. The woman snorted through her mental list, counting each on her finger, then confirmed. Nope, not a single one. Wasn't the need for him anyhow, don't you think? The fire was out before you knew it. So, when did Janice come into this? After the explosion? Madelyn asked. I didn't see Janice at all. What about me? Madelyn pressed. The woman absently shook her head. After the fire was extinguished and the EMS treated the boy, everyone went home. Whole place was cleared out in an hour. An hour? Janice asked. How is that even possible? Janice eyed the building with a bit more scrutiny, starting with the entrance and then the adjacent windows. Everything visible was black. A deep layered smoky black could only result from extensive and continued heat. The front door hung on a single hinge. The second of the 2 doors couldn't be seen from their vantage point, if there was a door remaining at all. The windows fared no better. The window sills jutted in several directions, each crisped to points. Janice could see chairs pasted against the far left wall. Tables were split into unrecognizable slabs of cooked wood. An hour? Impossible. She had to be mistaken. You said the boy went home. Oh, sure. Benji was his name, I think. Benjamin Watson, Janice confirmed. The kid who was thrown through a window after an explosion, Madeline asked. She was looking at Janice now. Wide-eyed. Yep, that's the one. I think Mr. Tweedle and maybe a waiter took him home. He was gone before the fire was out. Where was he? I mean, where did he land? Janice asked the woman. Again, damn it. She knew her name. Why couldn't you remember it? The woman mentioned them. The woman motioned them to the center of the road, pausing only to let a few oncoming cars pass. She looked to the restaurant, then pointed to a dark concrete patch in the far lane. That has to be at least 30 feet from the window. Janice marched to the tape section in front of the restaurant. And look, she argued, the window is maybe 6 feet tall. You're telling me this kid broke through this window with enough force to land, she pointed to the mark, way the heck over there? That's about the size of it. Look, I'd love to sit here and chat up the physics of last night's catastrophe, but I'm late for an appointment. Janis, Madelyn, I'll see you two at the board meeting tomorrow night. With that, the woman strode away in the direction she came. Tristy, Madelyn snapped. She's on the gala committee with us. Didn't she come from that direction? Janice asked. Madelyn peered through the window. She let out a sound like a harumph and placed her hands on her hips. Janice joined her. Should we go in? No, good Lord, look at this place. It could collapse in any second. Janice brushed off her arms and muttered, We're probably too close standing here. Madelyn grunted again. What are you looking at? Madelyn pointed to the back of the restaurant. You remember what happened, right? Sure, I suppose. The kid ran into the kitchen, something blew up, and somehow we both wound up in the street. Nuh-uh, Madelyn argued. You were talking, almost crazy talk if you ask me, but damn, I was so hungry at the time. It could be my mind's playing tricks on me. She motioned Janice over. Come here, look. Janice followed her hand to the far side of the restaurant. We were back there, see? A table marked the epicenter of the event, with chairs and tables plastered against the wall around it. He was sitting there, and we were one table over. But that's not the fucked up part. It's not? Janice asked. No, look, we were in there, talking about the kid's balefire, remember? That light within him, right? The damn thing was pulling us all over town last night. Okay, sure, I remember that. So he was talking to the waiter. You sort of flipped your lid, wouldn't even wait for a fucking salad, which irked the shit out of me, Madelyn digressed. Janice glared at her, and she continued. Right, so you lunged at the kid, reached for him like a living nightmare of scary. Madelyn chuckled. Still gives me the willies. Focus, Madelyn, Janice instructed. Right. She placed both hands to her cheeks, then shot her arms towards the rear of the restaurant. When your hand touched his shoulder, the kid flew away. Flew? Sweetie, you both flew, and hard. From what I saw, it was you who went through the window. The kid hit the kitchen, and I mean hit. She pointed to the wall on the right side of the table. The wall folded into the kitchen, leaving shards of drywall and paneling jutting from the exposed edges. The kid hit the wall, and it took it with him. It was like the whole fucking room followed him inside. A second later, a fireball, and out the door he went. The two moved to the entrance. I don't know what the woman saw, but it ain't what happened. But how did I wind up over there? Janice asked. Her bed had to have been at least 35 feet away. Well, when I ran out of the restaurant, which, come to think of it, not sure how or when I did that, but whatever. She inspected her arms and legs. I came outside, and you were standing over him, talking. I was standing. Sure, looked all menacing, too. Just to clarify, I was enamored, inspired. You were a fucking queen bee. Anyway, you told the kid the balefires hooked its mitts into him, or something like that, and then you fainted. I guess you were too close, 'cause you repelled each other, though you shot a hell of a lot farther than he did. Janice ran a hand through her hair and emptied her lungs. This was way too much to process in one sitting. I tried to wake you up. I mean, everyone else was leaving. Figured it was a good time for us to scat, you know? You wouldn't budge. When I tried to get help, everyone just sort of blew me off. That part was super weird. That's the weird part, Janice asked. Madeline nodded. Oh, this is giving me a headache. She raised both hands, drew in a breath, and committed to further examination. We've got to. A young man strode past the two of them, smiled at Janice, and then said, Hello! Hi, she replied and continued. We've got to look at the Janice, good, looking good today, an older female said while passing. Great, thanks, she said, and then turned to Madeline. Janice, great to see you. Oh, for fuck's sake, Janice roared. Janice, said another neighbor from the adjacent street, jumping and happily waving. Go fuck yourself, Janice screamed. She gripped Madeline's arm and pulled her away from the building. Well, that was rude, Madeline stated. She stumbled to keep pace with Janice. How are you, Janice? An older man acknowledged her with the tip of his hat. Great, stuff it. She quickly scanned for a cab, then began to march home. Cars pulled to the side of the road, stores emptied, people gravitated toward them from all directions and greeted them with a wink and a smile. Janice shouldered through those in her way until she turned off the main thoroughfare and onto 10th Street. Janice and Madeline pressed their backs against the brick wall of Farmhands Insurance and caught their breaths. I stand corrected, Madeline managed between breaths. This is the weirdest thing to happen today. Has the whole town gone ape? Oh my God! Janice jumped before finishing her sentence as a boy sped around the corner and slid to a halt when spotting the two. Hi, Janice, he said with a wide smile. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old, and judging by the frayed wool coat over patched jeans, certainly not from this part of town. Well, you little, Janice began, fully intent on lambasting this brat with a myriad of choice words, intent on sending him screaming to whatever hole he crawled out of. Madeline gently gripped her arm and silenced her with a raised hand. She knelt in front of the boy and smiled. He returned the smile as feebly as a drunken sailor, swapping his gaze between the two women. Hi, my name's Madeline. Hi, he said, then looked up. Hi, Janice. Over here, Madeline stated while snapping her fingers. He returned his attention to Madeline, looked up to Janice, then back to Madeline after she coaxed his attention by gently placing a finger to his chin. Freaky, right? Madeline asked. She waved a hand in front of the boy's face. He remained awkwardly motionless, albeit a happy, awkwardly motionless kid. Janice knelt beside Madeline. What do you think all this is about? She asked. Hi, the child reacted. I don't know, Madeline sang, wiggling her shoulders as she added. But this little guy isn't all here, are you? He asked the child. The boy nodded. What's your name, kid? Janice asked. And if you say hi one more time, the boy opened his mouth and ran when Janice glared at him. The two women stood and watched him until he reached the corner, turned, waved, then disappeared down the road. This is the oddest day. No kidding. The two looked toward Main Street, and when a man silhouetted by the light stopped and turned to face them, both began marching down 10th. My house right now, Janice declared under a chorus of hellos. And that is Chapter 5. Benji will hop along on Chapter 6. I imagine he's still recovering. And, what a ride there, huh? So, things are getting a little weird in the town of Lauradale, and Janice and Benji and Edward are definitely at the epicenter. So join us next week where we'll delve into Chapter 6, where we find out what's happened to Benji, where we go from here, and what is it about this stone. This is Christopher J. Finn, Boogie Rags by night, and I will catch you later.